friends, welcome to this daily video devotional. We're going to read this morning from the book of Deuteronomy, which is probably not one that we jump to on a regular basis. But what we find in it is kind of a reiteration of some of the rules that are set out, the part of the covenant, the relationship building guidelines that God gives to God's people, the people that are freed from slavery in Egypt, and now we call them the Israelites, right? They're the early Jewish people. And so we find here some unique rules. Let's call them rules or guidelines. And one of them we find in verse 14 of chapter 19. So Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 14. And it says this: "You must not move your neighbor's boundary marker set up by former generations on the property that will be allotted to you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess." Maybe you didn't realize that the Bible actually talked about property lines, right? It seems kind of a strange thing for the Bible to get into, or really for God to care about. But let's think about why this might be important. You know, sometimes we think about the people in the Bible as somehow being extra special. Now, certainly there are extra special people in the Bible. Jesus is an extra special person, right? And maybe we might elevate people like Paul to being extra special as well. But they're still people, and with the exception of Jesus, they're still people, right? And there's no exception for those who were part of the tribe of Israel. Right? The people of Israel, the people of God who God made this covenant with, they like to have things. They like to have property. And you can imagine that there was probably times when they wanted more than someone else, or felt they deserved more than someone else. Because remember, they're people, just like you and I. They sometimes want things that they don't really need or don't have. And so this law is put in, this guideline is put in to remind them that there is a property being given to you. And there's a need to appreciate that space. And to realize that when you have more, someone has less. It's a zero-sum game, right? When you take more, someone has less. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't buy property? That someone who has acres of property versus someone who has very little green grass in front of their home or their apartment, that somehow there's something wrong? Not necessarily. Instead, what we need to think about is, how are we determining the property that we have? How are we determining how we use that property? I was thinking about some friends in my life who have a large farm, and they've been able to turn that into a place where pictures can be taken for families and family events can be had there. We had our kid's first birthday at this place. I think about others who own a significant amount of property, and they use it for farming, and some even for some agro education, right, to teach others. But how about the properties of things like our homes, our dwellings, the places where we live? How do we use those? Certainly right now they are kind of our quarantine zones, but outside of this time, how do we see our spaces being used? Do we have large space that we use as just a retreat for ourselves, or do we open up those spaces to be hospitable and to be a gathering place? You see, it matters how we think about the spaces in our lives, the physical spaces in our lives. And I think that's why God addresses this, along with other reasons, but God addresses this idea of space. But I think there's also one other thing we have to acknowledge, and that is that the spaces we occupy are spaces that are entrusted to us. They're entrusted to us by God. They're entrusted to us that we would use them for good, godly purposes. That doesn't mean you have to find a space in every room for a kneeler so that you can be in prayer 3 hours a day. But how can we use those spaces to do good for God? Maybe the youth group needs a place to gather when it's safe to do so indoors, and and they want a place where they can have a progressive dinner or just gather for some fun in a pool. Maybe you have that and provide that. Maybe you have an extra room where someone who is just down on their luck can stay for a time, or even if they're just coming through, would find a warm meal. How big's your table? Can it fit others around it? Can you make it a habit of having a family dinner once a week that involves inviting your kids' friends over for dinner, or some friends from church or from work, and expanding the size of your family dinner? The spaces that we use matter. The spaces where we occupy matter. God knew that. And I think the people of Israel and all those before us understood that. So let us understand it too. And let us find creative ways, even now, to use the spaces that we have, the property that we have, to do good. Amen.